The silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was a warning. I smoothed a dress that cost 3 weeks of my salary, knowing it would still look cheap to my father-in-law. Graham Hale didn't respect effort. He respected bloodlines. As we passed the iron gates, I told myself to endure just one more dinner. I didn't know that by the time dessert arrived, I would stop trying to survive his family and start planning to dismantle it. The vanity mirror in the passenger seat visor was too small to show the whole truth. But it showed enough. My lipstick was a shade too dark for a summer evening in Connecticut. My earrings, small pearl studs I had bought with my first bonus check 5 years ago, looked like children's toys compared to the diamonds I knew would be waiting for me inside the house. I flipped the visor up with a snap, the plastic sound sharp in the quiet leather interior of the car. Ethan reached over and squeezed my knee. His hand was warm, familiar, and typically comforting, but tonight it felt heavy. "Relax, Nora," he said, keeping his eyes on the winding driveway that cut through the manicured forest of Larkhaven. "It is just dinner. Dad has been looking forward to seeing us." I looked out the window. The trees here were different than the ones I grew up with in Ohio. These oaks looked like they had been paid to stand straight. "He has been looking forward to seeing you." "Ethan," I corrected him, keeping my voice even. "I am just the admission price he pays to get you at the table." Ethan sighed, that soft, exhaling sound he made whenever I pointed out the reality of his family. He hated conflict. He treated tension like a spill on a rug, something to be dabbed away quickly before it set. "He is trying. Nora, just give him a chance. For me, for him." I would walk through fire. I had already walked through 3 years of polite exclusions, backhanded compliments, and wedding invitations that managed to spell my maiden name wrong twice. I smoothed the fabric of my navy dress. It was silk, tailored, and expensive, at least by the standards of my salary as a turnaround consultant. But in the world of Graham Hale, if it did not come from a runway in Paris or a vault in Zurich, it was essentially costume jewelry. We pulled up to the main house. It was a sprawling limestone beast that looked less like a home and more like a municipal library built by a robber baron in the 1920s. The gravel crunched under the tires of our sedan, a sensible luxury car that looked like a toy next to the line of vintage roadsters and armored SUVs parked near the fountain. I took a breath. I was 33 years old. I managed restructuring projects for companies with $50 million in revenue. I had fired incompetents twice my age and stared down union reps who wanted my head on a pike. I could handle a dinner. I was wrong. The dining room was a cavern of mahogany and gold leaf, lit by a chandelier that probably cost more than my parents' mortgage. There were 12 people seated at the long table, a mix of board members, distant cousins, and social climbers who clung to the Hale family like barnacles on a whale. Graham Hale sat at the head of the table. He was a man who took up space even when he was sitting perfectly still. He had silver hair swept back with aggressive precision and eyes the color of dirty ice. When we entered, he did not stand. He simply gestured to the empty seats with a glass of scotch, his smile stopping just short of his eyes. "Ethan, my boy," he boomed, "and Nora, you made it. The traffic from the city is terrible. I hear, especially for those who have to commute." It was the first jab. A reminder that I worked for a living, while the people at this table merely managed what they owned. The drive was fine. "Graham," I said, taking my seat. The server immediately placed a napkin on my lap, as if I were incapable of doing it myself. Dinner was a theater of cruelty disguised as conversation. To my left was a woman named Claire Vanderwall, a childhood friend of Ethan's. She was everything I was not: tall, blonde, and possessing that effortless, languid posture that comes from never having carried a heavy box in your life. She touched Ethan's arm every time she laughed, which was often. Graham watched them with approval. He directed the conversation to summers they had spent at the vineyard, inside jokes about boarding school, and people I had never met. I ate my soup in silence, the clinking of silver spoons the only rhythm I could follow. Then, Graham turned his gaze on me. It felt like a spotlight hitting a prisoner. So, Nora, he said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume that somehow carried to every corner of the room. Ethan tells me you are still doing that. Consulting work. Fixing broken little shops? I wipe my mouth carefully. I work in corporate restructuring. Graham, we help mid-sized companies avoid bankruptcy. It is complex work. Bankruptcy, he mused, swirling his drink. A fascinating concept. In my experience, if a company is failing, it is usually because the people running it lack the breeding for leadership. You cannot teach a donkey to win the Kentucky Derby. Can you? A few people chuckled. Ethan shifted in his seat. It is usually a matter of liquidity and poor leverage management. I said, my voice tight. Not breeding. Graham smiled. It was a predatory expression. Of course. You would know about making the most of limited resources. Your father was in manual labor. Was he not? My father was a foreman at a steel plant. I said, he managed 200 men. Honest work, Graham said, nodding mockingly. Very salt of the earth. We need people like that. Someone has to fix the pipes when they burst. Claire laughed, a high tinkling sound. Oh, Graham, behave. You are making her blush. I was not blushing. I was burning. But I held my tongue. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to step in. To say that my father was a brilliant man who put 2 kids through college. To say that my work was vital. Ethan took a sip of his wine. He did not look at me. The courses came and went. The humiliation was a slow drip. Graham asked where I bought my dress, then asked if it was on sale. He asked if my parents were enjoying their retirement, then asked if they needed help paying for heat this winter. Each question was a razor cut, shallow but stinging. Finally, the servers cleared the plates for dessert. Graham stood up, tapping his spoon against his crystal glass. The room went silent. I would like to propose a toast, he said. Ethan looked up, hopeful. He thought this was the turn, the moment where his father played nice. To family, Graham said, raising his glass, to keeping the bloodline strong, and to Ethan. He looked down at his son with a mixture of pity and disappointment that made my stomach turn. Ethan, you have always had a big heart. You bring home stray dogs, broken birds, and now, well, let us just say you have a charitable soul. Graham's eyes locked onto mine. There was no humor in them, only cold, hard malice. Some men marry for power, some for beauty. Ethan married for charity. But we welcome you anyway. Nora, as the saying goes, one man's trash is another man's daughter-in-law. The silence that followed was absolute. It hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The word trash echoed in my head. He had said it with a smile. He had framed it as a joke, but everyone at the table knew what it was. It was an eviction notice. I waited. I looked at the guests. A few of them were looking down at their plates, embarrassed. Claire was covering a smile with her hand. Then I looked at Ethan. This was the moment, the test. If he stood up now, if he threw his napkin on the table and told his father to go to hell, we could survive this. We could walk out together and never look back. Ethan sat frozen. His face was pale. He looked at his father, then at me, his eyes wide with panic. He gave a weak, nervous chuckle. Dad, he said, his voice cracking. That is a bit much. A bit much. That was his defense. That was his sword and shield. Graham laughed, a booming sound that gave everyone else permission to join in. The table erupted in polite, relieved laughter. They were laughing because the king had laughed. They were laughing because they were safe, and I was the target. I did not move. I did not blink. I felt something inside me snap. It was not a loud break. It was the quiet sound of a tether being cut. I stood up. My chair scraped against the parquet floor. A harsh, wooden scream that cut through the laughter. The room went quiet again. Nora? Ethan whispered. Reaching for my hand, I pulled away. I did not look at him. I looked straight at Graham Hale. Enjoy your dessert, Graham, I said. I hear it is rich. I turned and walked out. I did not run. I did not cry. I walked with the same steady cadence I used when entering a boardroom to tell a CEO he was being removed. Ethan caught up to me in the foyer. The butler was holding my coat, his face a mask of professional invisibility. "Nora." "Wait." Ethan grabbed my arm. I spun around. "Do not touch me." He flinched. "Nora, please. You know how he is. He has had too much to drink. He was just joking." "Joking?" I repeated. "He called me trash." "Ethan, in front of your friends, in front of the woman he wants you to sleep with. And you laughed." "I did not laugh. I was trying to de-escalate it. You were trying to survive him." I said, my voice shaking now. "You are 35 years old. Ethan, but in this house, you are just a terrified little boy hoping Daddy does not take away the credit card." "That is not fair," he snapped. "I defend you all the time, not when it matters." I said, "I am leaving. Do not follow me." I walked out into the cool night air. I got into my car, the same sensible sedan that looked like a toy, and locked the doors. I drove until I was through the iron gates and down the winding road. Pulling over into a small turnout that overlooked the valley, I turned off the engine. The silence rushed back in. I put my hands on the steering wheel and gripped it until my knuckles turned white. I started to shake. It was a violent, physical reaction. My teeth chattered. I gasped for air, tears hot and angry streaming down my face. But as I sat there, watching the lights of the Hale estate twinkling like a distant, poisonous star on the hill, the shaking changed. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it was clarity. For 3 years, I had tried to negotiate my dignity. I had treated their respect like a budget item I could earn if I just cut enough corners of myself to fit their spreadsheet. I had thought that if I was smart enough, successful enough, polite enough, they would finally see me as an asset. But to Graham Hale, I would never be an asset. I was a liability. I was dirt on the floor of his pristine life. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The silk of my sleeve came away damp. He called me trash. Fine. I put the car in gear. If I was trash, then I had nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people in the world. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Klein Associates at 7 o'clock sharp. My eyes were puffy, but my suit was armor. I wore charcoal gray, sharp-shouldered and severe. I had a meeting with the board of Redline Logistics, a mid-sized shipping firm that was bleeding cash from a dozen self-inflicted wounds. When I entered the conference room, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The CEO, a man named Henderson, who had inherited the business from his father, looked at me with disdain. He saw a young woman with a notepad. He did not see the executioner. "Ms. Bailey," Henderson said, leaning back in his chair. "I do not see why we need this meeting. Our cash flow issues are temporary. The market is just soft." I did not sit down. I walked to the whiteboard and uncapped a red marker. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice crisp, "you are paying $300,000 a month for warehouse space in New Jersey that has been empty for 2 years. You have a fleet of trucks that are operating at 40% capacity because your dispatch software is a decade old, and you have 5 vice presidents of marketing for a company that sells cardboard boxes." I wrote the number on the board. $4 million. "This is your projected loss for this quarter." I said, "This is not a soft market. This is a hemorrhage." The room was silent. Henderson looked at the number, then at me. "What do you propose?" he asked, his arrogance deflating. I capped the marker. "We sell the New Jersey lease. We outsource the dispatch to a third-party logistics firm, and we cut the executive team by 60%, starting with the marketing department." "But those are my friends," Henderson protested. "Do you want to have friends, or do you want to have a company?" I asked. "Because by Christmas, you will not have both." We closed the deal by noon. I saved 300 jobs on the loading docks by cutting 4 jobs in the C-suite. It was brutal. It was necessary. And it was the only language I spoke fluently, the language of leverage. I was back at my desk, organizing the Redline files. When my phone rang, it was Marla Klein. Marla was the founder of the firm, a woman who had taught me everything I knew about corporate warfare. She was currently semi-retired, living in a house in the Hamptons that she had bought with the fees from a hostile takeover in the 90s. "Nora," she said, her voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "I heard about the Red Line deal. Brutal. I love it. I did what had to be done. Marla. Good. You are getting sharper. Listen, I am calling because I saw something odd this morning. I was looking through some bond yields for a client, and I noticed some movement on the secondary market." "Movement?" "High-yield debt," she said. "Junk status, practically, but it was packaged in a bundle that looked very familiar. It is tied to a holding company called Dominion." My heart stopped. "Hale Dominion Group, Graham's flagship company. That is Graham's company." I said, "I know." Marla said, "That is why I'm calling. Nora, companies like Hale Dominion do not issue debt that ends up in a junk bond bundle. They have credit lines with the biggest banks in the world. They borrow at prime rates. So why is their debt trading like garbage?" I asked. "Because they are borrowing against assets that are already leveraged," Marla said. "It is called double dipping. It is risky. It is desperate. And it usually means one thing. The cash is not where they say it is." I swiveled my chair around to look at the skyline. The Hale empire was built on a reputation of invincibility. Graham walked through the world like he owned the pavement. The idea that he was cash poor seemed impossible. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I am never sure until I see the books," Marla said. "But I smell blood in the water, and knowing how much that man loves you, I thought you might want to know. Thank you, Marla." I hung up. I sat there for a long time. The humiliation of the dinner was still a raw burn in my chest. Trash. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I stared at the blinking cursor. If Graham Hale was borrowing money like a desperate gambler, it meant his foundation was cracked. And if the foundation was cracked, the house could come down. I named the folder Project Glasshouse. I started with public filings. Hale Dominion was a private conglomerate, but it had subsidiaries that were publicly traded or had public debt. I pulled the 10K filings for their logistics arm. I pulled the environmental reports for their manufacturing plants. I pulled the property tax records for the estate in Larkhaven. I took screenshots. I downloaded PDFs. I created a spreadsheet tracking every board member, every executive, and every lawsuit filed against them in the last 10 years. In the world of the ultra-rich, stories were currency, but documents? Documents were weapons. The first person to produce the paper trail controlled the truth. I worked until the cleaning crew turned off the main lights. By the time I left, I had a timeline. I had a list of questions, and I had a goal. Ethan called me 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally went home to our apartment in the city, he was sitting on the couch, looking miserable. He had bought flowers, a massive bouquet of white lilies that looked like they belonged at a funeral. "Nora," he said, standing up. "Thank God. I was so worried." I walked past him and put my bag on the counter. "I am fine. Ethan, I am so sorry about last night," he said, trailing behind me like a puppy. "I talked to Dad. He feels terrible." "He does not feel terrible," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. "He feels annoyed that I made a scene. He wants to make it right." Ethan said, "He wants us to come to the gala on Saturday, the foundation gala. He says he will make a public toast to you, to welcome you properly." I paused, the glass halfway to my mouth. The Hale Foundation Gala. It was the biggest social event of the season. Senators, bankers, and industry titans would be there. It was the inner sanctum of the Hale network. "A public toast," I repeated. "Yes," he promised. "Please, Nora, just come. Show him we are the bigger people. Show him he cannot break us." I looked at my husband. He really believed it. He believed that if we just smiled harder, the shark would stop biting. I did not want peace. I did not want a toast. But Marla's voice echoed in my head. "I smell blood in the water. If Hale Dominion was unstable, the cracks would show at the gala. People talk when they drink expensive champagne. Executives whisper when they think the music is loud enough to hide their secrets. I needed access. Okay, I said. Ethan slumped with relief. Really? You will come? I will come, I said, but I'm not wearing the navy dress. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. It was a kaleidoscope of diamonds, tuxedos, and fake smiles. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I wore black. It was a floor-length gown, sleek and sharp as a knife, with a back that plunged low. It was not a dress for a daughter-in-law. It was a dress for a widow or a spy. Ethan held my arm, beaming. He thought I was playing the part. He introduced me to people, and I smiled, shook hands, and memorized names. Graham was holding court near the ice sculpture. When he saw us, he raised a glass. But he did not come over. The promised toast never happened. I did not care. I was not there for Graham. I circulated. I moved through the crowd. Listening, I heard a banker complain about interest rates. I heard a senator's wife gossip about a facelift. And then, I saw them. 2 men were standing near the terrace doors, away from the main crowd. One was the CFO of Hale Dominion, a man named Marcus Thorne. The other was a stranger, a nervous-looking man with a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. I signaled a waiter and took 2 glasses of champagne. I handed one to Ethan. Honey, I see an old client over there. I lied. Give me 5 minutes? Take your time, Ethan said, happy to be left near the bar. I slipped through the crowd and moved toward the terrace doors. I stopped just inside the heavy velvet curtains, turning my back to the men as if I were admiring the architecture. The music was loud, a live jazz band, but they were close enough, cannot keep shifting it. Marcus, the nervous man hissed. The auditors are asking for the Cayman records, specifically the Helix account. Stall them, the CFO said. His voice was low, dangerous. Tell them the records are being digitized. Tell them the server is down. I do not care what you tell them. We have 6 weeks, the nervous man said. If the audit committee sees the transfer logs, they will see the gap. $50 million. Marcus, it is not a rounding error. It will be back in the account by next month, the CFO said. The deal with Redwood is closing. The cash will flow back in. Just hold the line. I am scared. Marcus, Graham is playing with fire. Graham owns the fire department, the CFO snapped. Now fix your tie. You look like you're about to confess to a priest. Pull it together. They moved away, heading back toward the bar. I stood there, staring at the velvet curtain. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat, the Helix account, Cayman records, $50 million gap, Redwood. It was not just instability, it was fraud. Or at least, it was gross negligence. Graham was moving money he did not have to cover holes he could not fill. He was not a titan, he was a magician, and magicians relied on one thing, nobody looking at the other hand. I took a sip of my champagne. It tasted like victory. Graham Hale had called me trash because he thought I had no value. He thought I was powerless because I did not have his money. But power does not always come from money. Sometimes, it comes from knowing where the bodies are buried. I walked back into the party. I saw Graham across the room, laughing at his own joke, his hand resting on the shoulder of a senator. He looked untouchable. I smiled. Fragile structures can be acquired, and I was going to buy this one, brick by brick. I found Ethan. Ready to go? He asked. Not yet, I said, taking his arm. I want to dance. We walked onto the floor. As we spun, I looked over Ethan's shoulder at his father. Enjoy the party. Graham, I thought, it is going to be your last one. The dining room table in our apartment had ceased to be a place for meals. It was now the command center of a quiet insurrection. For 3 nights, I had barely slept. My laptop screen was the only source of light in the room, casting a blue, ghostly pallor over the stacks of printed 10K filings, subsidiary reports, and tax documents I had pulled from public databases. To the untrained eye, Hale Dominion Group was a fortress of American capitalism, a diversified conglomerate with holdings in real estate, logistics, pharmaceuticals, and energy. It looked impenetrable. It looked like old money, solid as granite. But I was not looking at the granite. I was looking for the cracks. I traced the flow of capital with a red digital stylus on my tablet. I highlighted the revenue streams from their logistics arm. A company called HD Transport. It was a cash cow, generating steady, reliable income. Then I drew a line to the parent company, Hale Dominion. The money did not stay in HD Transport to upgrade their fleet or pay their drivers. It was being swept upward, every single month, in the form of management fees and intellectual property licensing. I pulled up the file for their real estate division, Hale Properties. This was the crown jewel, the part of the business Graham bragged about at dinner parties. But the numbers told a different story. The occupancy rates were inflated. The debt service coverage ratio was razor thin. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The picture was coming into focus, and it was ugly. Graham was cannibalizing his own healthy children to feed the starving parent. He was draining the profitable subsidiaries to pay the interest on the massive debt load of the holding company. It was not illegal, not technically. It was standard corporate maneuvering, but it was dangerous. If one of those cash cows stumbled, if a strike hit the transport division, or a patent expired in pharma, the cash flow would stop, the debt payments would be missed, and the whole structure would collapse. It was a house of cards built on a fault line. I needed a second opinion. I needed someone who knew where the bodies were buried in this specific industry. Brookmere, New York, was the kind of town where the coffee shops sold lattes for $9 and the dogs were better groomed than most people. It was neutral ground, far enough from Larkhaven to avoid Graham's spies, but close enough to the city for Marla Klein. Marla was sitting at a corner table, reading the Financial Times with a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked like a retired art history professor, but I knew she had a killer instinct that would make a great white shark look like a vegan. "Nora," she said, folding the paper as I sat down. "You look tired. You look like you are plotting a murder." "I am plotting an acquisition." I corrected her. "Same thing. In our line of work," she said, signaling the waiter. "So, tell me, was I right about the debt?" "You were right," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "He is leveraged to the hilt. The liquidity ratios are a joke. He is moving cash around in a shell game to hide the fact that the core business is bleeding." Marla opened the folder. She scanned the spreadsheet I had created, her eyes darting across the columns. She hummed, a low sound of appreciation. "This is thorough," she said. "You found the intercompany loans. Smart. Most people miss those." I leaned in. "Marla, he is vulnerable. If we can get a foothold, if we can buy into the capital structure, we can force a change in management. We can prove he is reckless." Marla took off her glasses and looked at me. "Nora, listen to me carefully. You want to take down a billionaire. You do not do that by being richer than him. You will never be richer than Graham Hale. He can buy senators. He can buy judges. Then how do I win? You win by being smarter about leverage and timing." She said, "You do not need to own 51% of the stock to control a company. You just need to own the right piece of paper at the right time. If you own the debt, and he defaults, you own the company. If you own a small block of shares, but you have the other shareholders terrified of his incompetence, you control the board." She tapped the table with a manicured fingernail. "But you have to be willing to do what is necessary. Nora, corporate raids are messy. People get hurt, layoffs, pension cuts, selling off the parts for scrap. That is how you pay for the war." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I thought about the truck drivers at Redline Logistics. I thought about the receptionist who had worked at Hale Dominion for 20 years. "No," I said firmly. Marla raised an eyebrow. "No? I am not doing a scorched earth takeover." "Marla, I am not stripping the company. Then you are fighting with one hand tied behind your back," she said bluntly. "I do not care." I said, "I want to remove Graham because he is a bully and a fraud. If I destroy the livelihoods of 5,000 innocent workers to do it, then I am just a different kind of bully." I took a breath, steadying my voice. "Here are my rules. No harm to the workers. we protect the pension funds. No illegal tactics, no hacking, no blackmail, no planting evidence, and no public smear campaigns. I am not going to the tabloids to talk about his mistresses or his drinking." Marla stared at me for a long moment. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. "You want a clean kill," she said. "I want a provable kill." I said, "I want to beat him on the merits. I want the board to vote him out because the numbers say he is incompetent, not because the gossip columns say he is a monster." Marla picked up her coffee cup. "It is harder that way. Nora, it is much, much harder." "I know," I said. "Will you help me?" She looked at the folder again. "You are the best analyst I ever trained," she said. "And frankly, Graham Hale once undercut me on a deal in '98. I have been waiting 20 years to return the favor. Yes, I am in." When I got home that evening, the apartment smelled of expensive takeout. Ethan was in the living room, surrounded by glossy brochures. He looked up, his face lighting up with that eager, hopeful expression that used to make my heart melt, but now just made me feel tired. "Hey," he said, "I picked up dinner from that Thai place you like. And look at this." He held up a brochure. It showed a rendering of a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. "What is this?" I asked, putting down my keys. "I was thinking," he said, standing up and pacing with nervous energy. "Maybe we need a change of scenery. This place, it feels cramped. Does it not? I saw this penthouse in Tribeca. It is incredible. Nora, floor-to-ceiling windows, a private terrace." I looked at the price listed on the back page. $12 million. "Ethan," I said quietly, "we cannot afford a $12 million apartment." He waved his hand dismissively. "Dad said he would help. He said it could be an early inheritance gift. He wants us to be happy." "Nora, he knows things have been tense." I felt like I had been slapped. "He wants to buy us an apartment," I repeated. "He wants to help." Ethan said, "Look, I know you are still upset about the dinner, but he is trying. He asked about you today. He asked if you liked the view of the river." I looked at my husband. He was a good man. In his way. He was kind to waiters. He remembered birthdays, but he was fundamentally blind. He thought that if he covered the cage in gold leaf, it ceased to be a cage. I do not want his money. "Ethan," I said. "Nora, come on. It is just how families like ours work. Families like yours," I corrected. "Not mine." He dropped the brochure on the table. It slid across the surface, covering the notes I had left out about Hale Dominion's debt structure. "Why are you being so difficult?" he asked, his voice rising. "I am trying to fix this. I am trying to make a nice life for us. I bought you that necklace last week. I am looking at new apartments. What do you want?" I looked him in the eye. "I want you to understand why it was wrong for him to call me trash." I said, "I want you to understand that you cannot buy respect with a penthouse. I do not want compensation." "Ethan, I want a partnership. I have given you a partnership," he insisted. "We are married. We are not partners." I said softly, "We are roommates in your father's world." I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. I heard him sigh. Then the sound of the TV turning on. He was drowning out the conflict. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I could not rely on Ethan. He was part of the soft, insulated layer that protected Graham. If I was going to do this, I had to do it alone. I went back to the data. I remembered the conversation I had overheard at the gala. The Helix account, Redwood. I typed Hale Dominion Redwood into the search bar. Nothing. I typed Hale Dominion Environmental Liability. Generic boilerplate warnings in their annual reports. I typed Redwood Point Industrial Site. A hit. It was a local news article from 1994. Chemical manufacturer ceases operations at Redwood Point. I dug deeper. I went into the county archives, pulling scanned images of zoning permits and land deeds. The site had been owned by a company called Viridian Solvents. Viridian Solvents had dissolved in 1998. But who owned Viridian? I followed the trail of shell companies. Viridian was owned by Blue Water Holdings, which was registered in Delaware. Blue Water Holdings listed its primary address as a P.O. box in Larkhaven, Connecticut, and the signatory on the incorporation documents for Blue Water Holdings, Marcus Thorne, the current CFO of Hale Dominion. My pulse quickened. Graham had spun off a toxic asset into a shell company, let the shell company go bankrupt, and walked away from the cleanup. But if the land was still toxic, and if the veil could be pierced, if a lawyer could prove that Hale Dominion had effectively controlled Viridian, then Hale Dominion was still on the hook. I searched for current photos of Redwood Point. It was a fenced-off wasteland near the fictional Sound. There were signs warning of soil contamination. If the EPA or the state regulators found out that Hale Dominion had been secretly paying to keep a lid on this, that is what the man at the gala had implied. Wasn't it? Paying to keep it quiet? That was the liability. That was the bomb waiting to go off. 3 days later, I received a message on my personal email. It was from a sender named J.R. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single line of text. He is lying to the board. 2. There was no attachment, no context, but I knew who it was. At the gala. The nervous man talking to the CFO. I had memorized his face. And later, I had found him on the company website. Jonah Reese, Senior Risk Officer. He was the man responsible for calculating the potential costs of disasters, and he was terrified. I replied cautiously, "I am listening." The response came instantly. "I cannot talk on this channel. He monitors the servers, but the reserve numbers in the Q3 report are fiction. The real remediation cost for the point is north of $400 million. If that number hits the books, the bank covenants trigger an immediate default. $400 million. It was not just a liability, it was a death sentence for the company's liquidity. Then, the user went offline. The account was deleted. I stared at the screen. Jonah Reese was a loose thread. If I could pull him, the whole tapestry would unravel. But he was scared. He had reached out, then disappeared. I had to wait. The invitation to the Sunday brunch at the estate was not really an invitation. It was a summons. Ethan begged me to go. "Just for an hour," he had said. "Mom misses you." Ethan's mother was a ghost in her own house, a woman who had learned decades ago that silence was the only way to survive Graham. I went, mostly because I needed to see Graham face to face. I needed to see if he looked like a man sitting on a $400 million time bomb. The brunch was held on the patio, overlooking the sprawling green lawns. Servants moved silently with pitchers of mimosas. Graham was wearing a linen suit, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. After the meal, while Ethan was distracted by his mother showing him the new hydrangeas, Graham gestured for me to walk with him. "Walk with me. Nora," he said, "let us clear the air." We walked toward the rose garden. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and cut grass. "You seem unhappy." "Nora," Graham said, cutting straight to the chase, "I am not unhappy. Graham, I am just observant." He chuckled dryly. "Observant. Yes. You count the silverware. Do you not?" I stopped walking. "What do you want, Graham?" He turned to face me. He took a sip of his iced tea, the ice cubes clinking. "I want my son back," he said. "He is distracted. He is anxious. And I think it is because he is trying to bridge a gap that cannot be bridged." He looked me up and down, not with lust, but with the appraisal of a man buying a horse. "You are a smart girl. Nora, you have done well for yourself, considering where you started. But let us be honest, you are not happy here. You are exhausted trying to fit in, and Ethan is weak. He needs a wife who can carry the social load, not someone who battles him on every decision." I felt the anger rising, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. I kept my face blank. "Are you suggesting I leave him?" "I am suggesting a transaction," Graham said. "A business arrangement." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "I have had my lawyers draw up a draft. It is generous. $5 million, cash, tax-free, and a quiet, uncontested divorce. You keep your name. You keep your career. You just go away." He held the paper out to me. $5 million, he repeated. That is more money than your father earned in his entire life. You could start your own firm. You could travel. You could be free. I looked at the paper. He was trying to buy me off. He thought I was just a gold digger who had not cashed out yet. He thought the only reason I stayed was for the money. So he was offering to expedite the process, and he implied something else. Ethan will be taken care of, meaning, if I left, Ethan would get his inheritance. If I stayed, Ethan might be cut off. I did not take the paper. I looked up at his eyes. They were cold, dead things. Is that how you solve everything? Graham? I asked softly. He frowned. What? The environmental fines? The audit gaps? The bad debt? I asked. Do you just write a check and hope the problem goes away? His eyes narrowed. A flicker of something dangerous passed behind them. I do not know what you are talking about, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I think you do. I said, I think you are used to treating people like line items. You think you can delete me. I took a step closer to him. I am not for sale, Graham, and neither is your son. But you should keep that money. I have a feeling you are going to need it for legal fees. I turned and walked away. He called after me, his voice losing its polished veneer. You are making a mistake, girl. You are walking away from a fortune. I did not look back. I walked straight to Ethan, took his hand, and said, We are leaving. Monday morning. I was in Marla's office in the city. The view from her window looked down on the financial district. The engine of the world. He offered me $5 million to leave. I told her. Marla whistled. He is scared. He senses you are not under his thumb. He should be scared. I said, Marla, we need to move. I have the target list. I spread the new documents on her desk. Here is the plan. We target the Class B preferred shares. They have voting rights if the dividend is missed for 2 consecutive quarters. And has he missed the dividend? Marla asked. No, I said, but he paid the last one late. And if my source is right about the Redwood liability, he is going to have to hoard cash to pay for the cleanup or face the EPA. He will miss the next dividend. So we buy the Class B shares now. While they are undervalued, Marla said, nodding. Exactly. We also need to buy the debt on the secondary market, the bonds we saw. If we own enough of that debt, we can block any restructuring plan he tries to push through. We need capital, Marla said. Serious capital. I have a list of potential investors. I said, not the usual Wall Street sharks. I looked for people Graham has burned. I pointed to the names on my list. Sarah Jenkins. Her father's construction company was driven into bankruptcy when Hale Dominion refused to pay for a project in 2010. David Wu, tech investor. Graham blocked him from the board of a subsidiary because of his background, the pension fund of the Allied Machinists. They care about worker stability and hate executive excess. This is a coalition of the willing, Marla said, a revenge club, a justice club. I corrected. We pitch them on the returns, because the company is valuable if we strip out the corruption. But we seal the deal on the reform. Marla leaned back. It is risky. Nora, if Graham finds out we are organizing this, he will come at you with everything he has. He will sue you. He will slander you. He already thinks I am trash. I said, let him try. We spent the next 6 hours drafting the pitch deck. We structured it as a special purpose vehicle, an investment fund created solely to acquire a controlling interest in Hale Dominion. We called it the Phoenix Partnership. By the time I left Marla's office, the sun was setting. I felt a strange sense of calm. The machinery was in motion. I went back to my own office at the consulting firm to clear up some paperwork for my actual job. The office was empty, the cleaning crew humming vacuum cleaners in the distance. On my desk, sitting squarely in the center of my blotter, was a manila envelope. It was thick. It had no return address. It was not sealed with tape, but with a heavy red wax seal, as if someone was trying to be dramatic, or simply using whatever was at hand in an old study. But it wasn't a wax seal. It was just a sticker. I picked it up. My name was typed on the front, Nora Bailey. I used my letter opener to slit the top. I pulled out a stack of photocopied documents. They smelled faintly of toner and fear. The top page was an internal memo from Hale Dominion, dated 3 months ago. To Graham Hale. CEO from Marcus Thorne. CF. O. Re. Redwood Point. Assessment update. I began to read. Graham, the latest soil samples are conclusive. The containment wall we built in '98 has failed. The solvents are leaching into the water table. The projected cost to remediate is not $50 million as discussed. The engineering team estimates the total exposure is closer to $450 million. Furthermore, if this leaks to the public, we are looking at criminal negligence charges for the original concealment. We cannot disclose this in the Q3 filings. It would trigger the debt covenants immediately. I have moved the liability to the offshore entity as discussed, but this is a temporary fix. We are sitting on a powder keg. I turned the page. There were charts, soil analysis reports, emails between Graham and the legal team discussing how to bury the data. My hands were shaking. This was not just financial mismanagement. This was a crime. They were poisoning the water table and hiding it to save their stock price. This was the smoking gun. If I used this, I could destroy Graham instantly. I could send this to the New York Times, and he would be in handcuffs by Friday. But if I did that, the company would implode. The stock would go to zero. The creditors would pick the carcass clean. 5,000 people would lose their jobs. The pension fund would be wiped out. Graham would fall. But he would take everyone else down with him. I remembered my rule, no scorched earth. I had to save the company to save the workers, which meant I had to take control before this came out. I had to be the one to disclose it, manage the cleanup, and negotiate the fines. From the CEO's chair, I slid the documents back into the envelope. I looked out the window at the city lights. The game had just changed. It was not just about revenge anymore. It was a rescue mission. I put the envelope in my bag. I needed to lock this in a safe deposit box. I walked out of the building, the weight of the evidence pressing against my side. I hailed a cab. As I got in, I checked my phone. A text from Ethan. "I'm sorry about Sunday. Dad is just difficult. Let's talk later." I didn't reply. I looked at the driver. "Take me to the bank," I said, "the one with the 24-hour vault." The manila envelope in the safe deposit box was not evidence. In a court of law, it was fruit of the poisonous tree. If I walked into a boardroom and slapped down a stolen internal memo, Graham's lawyers would have me arrested for corporate espionage before I could finish my opening statement. I did not need the memo to be the weapon. I needed it to be the map. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the dutiful consultant at my firm, advising manufacturing companies on inventory turnover. By night, I was a forensic historian of Graham Hale's corruption. The memo mentioned vendor disputes regarding the containment wall at Redwood Point in 1998. I went to the county clerk's office in Larkhaven and pulled the civil docket for that year. I found it. Apex Engineering versus Viridian Solvents, a lawsuit for unpaid invoices, settled out of court. I pulled the building permits for the site. There was a request for a subsurface retention structure, a fancy word for a wall to hold back poison, filed by a contractor who shared an address with a Hale Dominion shell company. I went to the State Environmental Protection Archives. I found a zoning variance request from 2004, asking to reclassify the Redwood Point land from industrial to conservation easement. The application was signed by Marcus Thorne. Years before he became CFO, piece by piece, document by document, I built a mirror image of the stolen memo using only public records. The memo told me where to look. The public records provided the unshakable proof. Graham had been paying to keep Redwood Point quiet for 20 years. He was not just ignoring a problem, he was actively managing a cover-up. I organized everything into a binder. It was 3 inches thick. I called it the foundation. Now, I needed the money. The conference room at Marla's office was soundproof, which was necessary because the people gathered around the table had enough grievances to scream the building down. There were 5 of them. Marla sat at the head, the grand dame of the operation. To her left was Sarah Jenkins. She was in her 40s, wearing a faded denim jacket that cost more than my car. Her father had owned a massive construction firm that Hale Dominion had driven into the ground by disputing change orders until the cash flow dried up. Graham had bought the bankrupt assets for pennies on the dollar. Next to her was David Wu, a tech genius who had developed a proprietary logistics software. Graham had invited him onto a subsidiary board, stole the IP through a loophole in the employment contract, and fired him. Then there was Mr. Henderson, the union representative for the Allied machinists. He represented the workers at 3 of Hale Dominion's factories. He looked tired. He knew Graham was cutting safety corners to boost margins. And finally, there was me. I stood up and placed my hands on the table. "Thank you for coming," I said. "You all know why you are here. You have all been burned by Graham Hale." Sarah Jenkins snorted. "Burned is a polite word for it. He gutted my family legacy." "I know," I said, "and the natural instinct is to want to burn him back, to tear his company apart and sell the pieces." I looked at each of them. "But that is not what we are going to do." David Wu crossed his arms. "Then why are we here? If this is a charity mission, I am out. We are here to buy the company." I said, "Not to destroy it. We are going to form a special purpose vehicle, the Phoenix Partnership. We are going to quietly acquire the Class B preferred shares and the distressed debt. When Graham misses his next dividend payment, and he will, we are going to exercise our voting rights to call a special meeting." "And then?" Henderson asked, his voice gravelly. "And then we remove him for cause," I said. "We expose the financial mismanagement. We expose the hidden liabilities. We take control of the board. And what happens to the company?" Henderson asked. "My guys are worried about their pensions. Private equity usually means layoffs." I slid a document toward him. "This is our charter." I said, "It is legally binding. The Phoenix Partnership is committed to operational restructuring, not asset stripping. We will honor the pension obligations. We will invest in safety. We will stop the cash drain that Graham is using to fund his lifestyle. And we will put that money back into the business." Henderson looked at the paper, reading the fine print. "And the return?" David Wu asked. "I am a capitalist. Nora, I want my money back. Hale Dominion is currently undervalued by 30% because of the debt load and the mismanagement." I said, "Once we clean up the balance sheet and restore confidence, the stock will bounce. You will make a 20% return in 18 months. Sarah Jenkins looked at me. "You sound very confident for someone who is married to the man's son." The room went quiet. It was the elephant in the room. "I am not doing this for his son," I said, "and I am not doing this for me. I am doing this because Graham Hale is a cancer on a healthy organism. He thinks he is a king. I intend to prove he is just a bad manager." Marla spoke up. "I am putting in $10 million. The table shifted. Marla's money was the seal of approval. "I am in for 5, Sarah said. "For my dad, 8, David said. "But I want a seat on the Tech Advisory Committee." "Done," I said. Henderson looked at me. "The pension fund can allocate $2 million to alternative investments. But if you screw my workers, Mrs. Bailey, I will not need a lawyer. I will picket your house." I looked him in the eye. "Mr. Henderson, if I screw your workers, I will deserve it." We signed the papers an hour later. The Phoenix Partnership was born. We had $25 million in committed capital. It was not enough to buy the whole company, but it was enough to buy a seat at the table and a knife to carve the turkey. I got home at 11 o'clock that night. The apartment was dark, but the TV was on, playing a mute news channel. Ethan was sitting in the armchair, staring at the screen. He was drinking whiskey. The bottle was on the floor, half empty. "You are late again," he said without looking at me. I hung up my coat. I was working. "Ethan, working on what?" he asked. "You are not at the firm. I called your office. The receptionist said you left at 5. I froze. I had not covered my tracks well enough. "I have side projects," I said, walking toward the kitchen. "Side projects," he repeated. He stood up, swaying slightly. He walked over to the dining table, where I had left a stack of files the night before. He picked one up. It was a printout of the Hale Dominion debt maturity schedule. "Is this a side project?" he asked. "Investigating my father?" I took a deep breath. I could not lie to him any more. "Yes," I said. He threw the file down. "Why?" "Nora, why are you doing this? I told you he wanted to make peace. I told you about the apartment. He does not want peace. Ethan," I snapped. Turning to face him, "He wants submission. He is hiding massive losses. He is putting the entire company at risk to cover his own mistakes. So you are going to what? Be the hero?" He laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You are obsessed. You are spending every waking hour plotting against him. I am treating it like a business problem," I said, "because that is what it is." "No," Ethan said, stepping closer. His eyes were red-rimmed. "It is personal. You hate him because he was mean to you. So now you are digging up dirt, looking for leverage." He pointed a finger at me. "You know who does that? Nora? He does. You are becoming just like him." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back, my back hitting the refrigerator. "I am nothing like him," I whispered. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked. "You are secretive. You are ruthless. You are prioritizing winning over your family. You are looking at people as assets and liabilities. That is Graham Hale 101. I looked at my husband. He was hurting. He was lashing out because his world was cracking, and he did not know how to stop it. But he was wrong. There is a difference. "Ethan," I said, my voice shaking with the effort to stay calm. "What difference?" "Your father destroys people to feel powerful." I said, "He humiliates them at dinner tables. He fires them to save a penny. He pollutes their water to save his bonus. He breaks things because he thinks he owns them." I stepped forward, into his space. "I am trying to stop him from doing it again. I am not trying to destroy the company. I am trying to save it from him, and I am trying to save you from him." "Save me?" he scoffed. "By destroying my inheritance? By freeing you from the obligation to be his lapdog?" I yelled. Ethan flinched. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. He looked at me for a long moment, searching for the woman he had married, the quiet consultant who liked Thai food and Sunday walks. He could not find her. "I am going to stay at the club tonight," he said quietly. "Ethan, don't. I cannot be here. Nora, I look at you, and I do not know who you are." He grabbed his jacket and walked out. The door clicked shut. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The silence was absolute. I told myself I was right. I told myself I was doing the noble thing. But as I looked at the empty whiskey bottle on the floor, I wondered if Marla was right. Maybe there was no such thing as a clean kill. The next week, Graham launched his counteroffensive. He did not know about the Phoenix partnership yet. We had bought the shares through anonymous brokerages, but he smelled something in the air. Animals know when the barometer drops before a storm. Graham knew the market was turning. He started a reputation cleanse. I saw it everywhere. A full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal touting Hale Dominion's commitment to green energy, a glossy profile in a lifestyle magazine where Graham was photographed in a cable-knit sweater, walking his golden retrievers, with the headline, "The Heart of American Industry." He staged an employee appreciation day at the main logistics hub. He gave a speech about family values and handed out frozen turkeys. It was a performance. It was a signal. He was shoring up his defenses. He was building a wall of public goodwill so that if anyone attacked him, they would look like the villain. It made me sick. I knew that the money for those ads was coming from the same accounts that should have been paying for the Redwood cleanup. I needed Jonah Reese. I needed the inside man to confirm that the board was being fed lies. The public documents were strong, but a witness, a living, breathing witness, was the nail in the coffin. I sent a message to the burner email address he had used. "Meet me, Grand Central Terminal, Oyster Bar, Tuesday, 6 p.m. I did not expect him to show, but on Tuesday, at 6 o'clock, I was standing near the arched entrance of the famous restaurant. The terminal was a river of commuters, a chaotic flood of noise and motion. It was the perfect place to hide. I saw him. He was wearing a trench coat that was too big for him, looking over his shoulder every 3 seconds. He looked like a man who had not slept in a month. I walked up beside him and faced the other way, watching the crowd. "Jonah," I said softly. He jumped. "Jesus, you are Nora? Keep your voice down." I said, "Thank you for coming." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "I should not be here. If he finds out I talked to you—" "He will not find out." I said, "We are just two strangers waiting for a train. Tell me about the board meeting." Jonah swallowed hard. He presented the Q3 numbers last week. He whispered. He showed them a risk assessment for Redwood Point. It was a forgery. Nora. He edited the engineer's report. He changed critical failure to monitoring required. "You saw the original?" I asked. "I wrote the original executive summary," Jonah hissed. He shredded it. He presented a fake document to the audit committee. "That is fraud. That is 5 years in federal prison." I nodded. This was it. "And the liability?" I asked. "Where is it?" He moved it to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Helix. Jonah said, "He claims it is an independent insurer, but it is just a bank account he controls. He is using it to pay the hush money. But Helix is empty. If the state regulators issue a cleanup order, there is no money to pay for it. The check will bounce, and the EPA will seize the parent company's assets." Jonah looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I need out. Nora, I have a wife. I have a baby due in December. I cannot go to jail for him." I reached into my bag. Jonah flinched, as if he thought I was pulling out a gun. I pulled out a business card. It was for a law firm in D.C. that specialized in whistleblower protection. "What is this?" he asked. "This is your exit." I said, "You are going to call this number. You are going to file a formal whistleblower complaint with the SEC. You will submit the original unedited report and the proof of the Helix transfers." He looked at the card, then at me. "Are you going to pay me?" he asked. "I mean, if I do this, I lose my job. I lose my pension." I shook my head. "I cannot pay you. Jonah, if I pay you, you are a mercenary, and your testimony is worthless in court. Graham's lawyers would destroy you." His face fell. "Then why should I do it?" "Because if you do not, you are going to jail anyway when this collapses," I said, "and because this lawyer can negotiate immunity for you, you will not get rich, Jonah. But you will stay free, and you will be able to look your child in the eye." He stared at the card. The chaos of the station swirled around us, but he was perfectly still. "He is going to kill me," he whispered. "He is a businessman, not a hitman." I said, "He relies on fear. Stop being afraid, and he loses his power." Jonah took the card. He slipped it into his pocket. "I will think about it," he said. "That is all I ask." He turned and melted back into the crowd. I watched him go. I hoped he was brave enough. I hoped I had not just sent a terrified man to his doom. Thursday morning, the day everything went sideways. I was at my desk at my consulting firm, reviewing the inventory logs for a tire manufacturer in Ohio. My boss, Robert, stuck his head in my door. "Nora, got a minute?" Big news. I followed him into his office. Robert was a good guy. A career consultant who loved the game. He looked excited. Sit down, he said. "You are going to love this. We just landed a whale." "Oh?" I asked. "We have been courted by a major conglomerate for a preliminary efficiency audit," he said. "They are looking to trim fat before a potential refinancing, and because you are my best restructuring lead, I am assigning you to run point." He slid a file across the desk. The logo on the cover was a stylized H inside a globe. Hail Dominion Group. My stomach dropped through the floor. Graham. He was bringing my firm in. Why? Was it a coincidence? Or did he know? Did he know I worked here? Of course he knew. He had mocked my job at the dinner table. This was a trap, or a test. If I took the assignment, I would have access to all the internal data I needed. It was the perfect Trojan horse. I could walk in the front door, audit the books, and find the smoking gun myself. But if I took the assignment, I would be a fiduciary of the client. I would be legally bound to protect their interests. If I used that information to help the Phoenix partnership buy the company, I would be committing insider trading and violating my professional ethics. I would be disbarred. I would go to prison. And if I refused the assignment without a reason, Robert would fire me. You do not say no to a whale. Nora? Robert asked. You look pale. Is it too much? I know it is your father-in-law's company, but I thought it might be a good opportunity for you to shine in front of the family. He thought he was doing me a favor. I looked at the file. It was right there. Access, power, the easy way to win. But Marla's voice was in my head. Clean kill. If I did this, I was no better than Graham. I was a liar. I was a cheat. I stood up. Robert, I said, I cannot take this assignment. Why not? He asked, confused. It is a conflict of interest. Sure. But we can build a Chinese wall. No. Robert, I said, it is not just a conflict. I am currently involved in an external investment vehicle that is taking a position in Hale Dominion. Robert's jaw dropped. You are what? I am part of a group preparing a shareholder action against the current management. I said, I cannot be their consultant. I am their adversary. Robert stared at me. He looked at the file, then at me. Nora, do you realize what you are saying? If you are hostile to a client, you cannot work here. We cannot have a partner who is suing our biggest account. I know. I said, I looked around the office. I had worked here for 5 years. I had built a career. I had a 401k. I had health insurance. I have to resign. Robert, effective immediately. He looked sad. He looked disappointed. Nora, are you sure about this? You are throwing away a partnership track. For what? A family feud? It is not a feud. Robert, I said, taking my ID badge off my lanyard. It is a correction. I placed the badge on his desk. I'm sorry. Robert, you are a good boss. But I have to do this. I walked out of his office. I went to my desk. I took my personal items, a framed photo of my parents, a cactus plant, and my lucky calculator. I walked out of the building at 11 a.m. I stood on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan. The wind was cold. I was unemployed. I had just cut off my only source of stable income. I had burned my safety net. I had bet everything on the Phoenix partnership. If we failed, I was not just divorced. I was destitute. I hailed a cab and gave my home address. When I opened the door to the apartment, the silence was deafening. It had been 3 days since Ethan left. His keys were not in the bowl. His shoes were not by the door. I put my box of office things on the floor. I sat on the couch, still in my coat. I looked around the room. It felt huge. It felt empty. I was truly alone. I had no husband. I had no job. I had only a binder full of public records and a terrifying amount of debt. I closed my eyes. The doubt crept in. Was I crazy? Was I destroying my life for pride? Then, I heard the key in the lock. My heart hammered. The door opened. Ethan stood there. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he had left in. He had not shaved. He looked like he had been sleeping in his car. Or not sleeping at all. He walked into the room and closed the door. He leaned against it, as if he did not have the strength to stand up straight. He looked at the box on the floor. You quit your job? He asked. His voice was hoarse. I nodded. I had to. Conflict of interest. He laughed, a soft, dry sound. You really are all in, aren't you? Yes. He walked over to the couch and sat down on the opposite end. He did not look at me. He looked at his hands. I went to the house yesterday. He said, to see Dad. I waited. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to ask him about the things you said, about the environment, about the bullying, and he dismissed me. Ethan said, he told me I was being hysterical. He told me to go buy a new car and stop worrying about grown-up business. Ethan looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He called me a child. Nora. He looked at me with this contempt, as if I was useless. I moved to reach for his hand, but I stopped. He needed to say it. I realized something. Ethan whispered, "He does not love me. He loves the idea of me. He loves having an heir, but he does not respect me." He took a shaky breath, and then I remembered the dinner. I remembered him calling you trash, and I remembered that I did nothing. He looked at me, and the pain in his face was raw. "I am sorry. Nora, I am so sorry." I reached out then and took his hand. It was cold. "Ethan." He squeezed my hand tight. "I need to know," he said, his voice hardening. "I need to know everything. Show me the files. Show me what he did. I need to know who my father really is." I looked at him. This was the moment. If I showed him, there was no going back. He would be an accomplice against his own blood. I stood up and walked to the dining table. I picked up the binder, the foundation. I brought it over and placed it in his hands. "Read it," I said. He opened the cover. The apartment was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of estrangement. It was the heavy, breathless silence of a library or a wake. Ethan sat at the dining table, the binder open in front of him. He had been reading for 3 hours. I sat across from him, pretending to review a spreadsheet. But mostly I was watching him. I watched the way his brow furrowed as he read the email chains about the Redwood Point cover-up. I watched his jaw tighten when he saw the transfer logs to the offshore accounts. He was grieving. He was not grieving a person. He was grieving an idea. He was mourning the myth of the great man, the benevolent patriarch who had built a world for his son to live in. He turned the last page and closed the binder. He did not look up immediately. He ran his hand over the leather cover, a gesture so tender and sad it made my chest ache. "He knew," Ethan said, his voice flat. "He knew about the groundwater. Since 1998, yes," I said, "and he paid to hide it. He paid lawyers instead of engineers. Yes." Ethan stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were a blur of gold and white against the darkness. "I always thought he was hard," Ethan said. "I thought he was cold because he had to be, because he was carrying the weight of the world. I told myself that his cruelty was a kind of strength, that he did the hard things so others did not have to." He turned to face me. "But this is not strength. Nora, this is cowardice." I stood up and walked over to him. I did not touch him. Not yet. He looked fragile, like glass that had already shattered but was still holding its shape. "I need your help." "Ethan," I said, "I know where the bodies are buried in the public record, but I do not know the family side. I do not know where he keeps the personal leverage." Ethan looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "He has a holding company," he said quietly. "Hale Family Trust. It is separate from the corporate structure. It holds the voting shares for the Class A stock." I nodded. "I know about the trust. It is impenetrable. It is not." Ethan said, "There is a clause, a competency clause. If the primary beneficiary acts in a way that endangers the corpus of the trust, the principal wealth, the secondary beneficiaries can vote to freeze his authority." My heart skipped a beat. "Who are the secondary beneficiaries?" I asked. "Me," Ethan said, "and his sister, my Aunt Catherine in Paris, Catherine Hale, the exile." She had not spoken to Graham in 20 years. If we can prove that his actions are not just illegal, but that they threaten to wipe out the family fortune. Ethan continued, his voice gaining a jagged edge. "We can trigger the clause. It does not remove him as CEO, but it freezes his voting bloc. It neutralizes his defense." I whispered. Ethan nodded. He looked sick. "I can call Catherine," he said. "She hates him, but she loves the money. If I tell her he's about to blow it all on an EPA lawsuit, she will sign whatever we need." I reached out and took his hand. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Once we do this?" "Ethan, there is no going back to Sunday dinners." He squeezed my hand. Hard. "There are no Sunday dinners. Nora, there's only a board meeting where he serves us our own dignity on a platter. Let us burn the table." With Ethan's intelligence, the Phoenix partnership moved from a theoretical threat to a kinetic weapon. Marla and I set up a war room in a rented office space in Midtown. It was nondescript, the kind of place that housed dental supply companies or defunct travel agencies. We had 3 monitors, a pot of coffee that was perpetually empty, and a whiteboard covered in the anatomy of Graham's empire. We did not attack the stock price directly. That would have been too loud. Instead, we went after the debt. Hale Dominion had issued a series of corporate bonds in 2015. They were trading at 90 cents on the dollar. Rated BBB-, we started buying. We bought in small blocks, 200,000 here, 500,000 there. We used different brokerages to mask the accumulation. We were like termites eating the foundation of a house. By the time the owner noticed the sawdust, the floor would already be gone. At the same time, we bought put options, bets that the stock price would fall. This was insurance. When we finally dropped the hammer, the stock would tank. The profits from the puts would give us the capital to buy the controlling shares at a discount. It was elegant, it was ruthless, and it was entirely legal. Marla sat at the main terminal, her eyes reflecting the cascading numbers. We just crossed the 5% threshold on the debt tranches, she said, taking a sip of cold coffee. Do we file the disclosure? Not yet, I said. We are buying the bonds, not the equity. We do not have to disclose until we hit 10% of the issue. Keep buying. I want to own enough of his debt that if he sneezes, I can call the loan. I added, You are enjoying this, Marla observed, not looking away from the screen. I am not enjoying it, I said, looking at the photo of Graham I had taped to the whiteboard. I'm just efficient. But Graham was not asleep. He felt the pressure. The bond prices were inching up because of our buying volume, and his CFO, Marcus Thorne, would have noticed the unusual activity. Graham's countermove was predictable. He did not come for me. He went for the weak link. He went for Ethan. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at the rented office, analyzing the accounts receivable for Hale Bioscience, the so-called crown jewel of the conglomerate. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan. He wants to see me. I stared at the text. My stomach tightened. Where? I typed back. The club. Alone. Be careful. I wrote, Do not sign anything. I sat there for 2 hours, unable to focus on the numbers. I imagined Graham pouring expensive scotch, putting his hand on Ethan's shoulder, using that voice that sounded like gravel and gold. He would charm him. He would threaten him. He would gaslight him until Ethan doubted his own name. When Ethan finally came home, he looked pale. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly. Tell me, I said, standing in the doorway. He offered me a job. Ethan said, I waited. Senior Vice President of Strategy. He said, reporting directly to him, triple my current salary, stock options, a seat on the foundation board. And the condition? I asked. Ethan turned to me. I have to divorce you, he said. I felt the air leave the room. He did not say it like that. Of course, Ethan said quickly. He said I need to clear the decks. He said you are a distraction. He said you are manipulating me, filling my head with lies because I am susceptible. Ethan laughed, a short, sharp sound. He told me that you are the one using me, Nora. He said you married me for the name, and now that you have realized I am not the heir apparent, you are trying to steal the company yourself. I walked over to the counter. And what did you say? I asked. Ethan looked down at his water glass. I almost said yes. The truth hung there, naked and ugly. I almost said yes because for 1 second, I wanted it to be true. I wanted to believe that he loved me and wanted me by his side. I wanted to believe that I could be the son he wanted. He looked up at me, but then I asked him a question. What question? I asked to see the books. Ethan said, I said, if I am going to be VP of strategy, I need to see the unredacted financials for the last 5 years. I need to know what I am strategizing. And? He froze. Ethan said, his eyes went dead. He told me that I did not need to worry about the numbers. He said that was what accountants were for. He said my job would be vision. Ethan slammed the glass down on the counter. Water sloshed over the rim. "Vision," he shouted. He wanted to pay me to be a hood ornament. He wanted to buy my loyalty with a title so I would shut up and let him bury the poison. He slumped against the counter, the anger draining out of him, leaving him exhausted. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. He buried his face in my neck. He was shaking. "He is scared." "Ethan," I whispered. "He is terrified because you asked the one question he cannot answer." "I am done." Ethan mumbled into my shoulder. "I am done with him. Burn it down. Nora, burn it all down." With Ethan's loyalty solidified, I returned to the data with a new ferocity. I needed to understand exactly how the machine worked before I dismantled it. I focused on Hale Bioscience. It was the division that produced medical devices, pacemakers, insulin pumps, surgical tools. It was the most profitable arm of the company, the one Graham pointed to whenever investors asked about growth. But the profit margins didn't make sense. They were 5 points higher than the industry average. Unless Graham had discovered a way to turn lead into gold, he was cutting costs somewhere invisible. I pulled the vendor lists. I cross-referenced them with the accounts payable ledgers I had reconstructed from the leak Marla had found. And there it was. Days payable. Outstanding. 120. Standard payment terms in the industry were 30 or 60 days. Hale Bioscience was taking 4 months to pay its suppliers. I looked at the names of the vendors. They weren't massive conglomerates. They were small precision machining shops in Ohio, specialized plastic molders in Pennsylvania, family-owned logistics firms in the Midwest. Graham was effectively borrowing money from these small businesses, interest-free. By withholding their payments, he was strangling them. A small machine shop cannot wait 4 months for a $100,000 check. They have to borrow money to make payroll while they wait for Graham to pay up. He was posting record profits by forcing his vendors into debt. It was predatory. It was vile. I printed the list. This was my platform. When we took over, I wasn't just going to fire Graham. I was going to fix this. I drafted a document. The Stabilization Plan. Item 1. Immediate release of all withheld vendor payments. Item 2. Standardize payment terms to 30 days. Item 3. Establish an independent vendor ombudsman. It would cost the company cash in the short term. It would lower the quarterly earnings. But it was the right thing to do. And it was the only way to build a company that didn't rot from the inside out. I showed it to Marla. "This is expensive." "Nora," she said, tapping the paper, "the investors will not like the cash hit. The investors want a stable company." I argued. "If these vendors go bankrupt, the supply chain breaks. If the supply chain breaks, we have no product. Graham is eating the seed corn. We are going to replant it." Marla smiled. "You are not a raider," she said. "You are a gardener, a very aggressive gardener with a flamethrower." The smoking gun arrived on a Thursday. I met Jonah Reese in a parking garage in New Haven. It was a cliché, meeting in the shadows of concrete pillars. But Jonah was beyond paranoid now. He looked like he had lost 10 pounds. He handed me a USB drive. "It is all there," he said, his voice trembling. "The original risk assessment from 2018, the one the engineers signed, and the version Graham presented to the board." I clutched the drive. "What is the difference?" I asked. "The original report says the containment wall has a structural integrity of 12%, Jonah said. "It says immediate remediation is required to prevent groundwater contamination. The version Graham presented says the wall is at 80% integrity and recommends routine monitoring." He forged the safety data. I said. He scanned the signature page from the old report and pasted it onto the new one. Jonah said, "It is clumsy. If anyone had looked closely, they would have seen the pixelation. But nobody looks closely at good news." I put the drive in my pocket. "You did the right thing, Jonah." He looked at me with haunted eyes. "I filed the whistleblower complaint this morning," he said. "My lawyer says the SEC will open an investigation within 48 hours. Then you need to disappear." I said, "Go to your in-laws. Turn off your phone." He nodded and got into his car. I drove straight to the legal team we had hired, a shark-like firm in Manhattan that specialized in corporate governance. They reviewed the files on the drive. The lead attorney, a woman named Harper with eyes like flint, looked up after 20 minutes. "This is it," she said. "This is fraud. Plain and simple. Falsifying board materials. Putting the company at massive undisclosed risk. If we present this to the board, they have a fiduciary duty to remove him. If they do not, they become personally liable for the damages." "Can we move?" I asked. "We need to call a special meeting." Harper said, "We need 50% of the voting power to demand it." I looked at Marla. "We have 10%. Marla said, "The Phoenix Partnership. We need the rest." I said, "We need the family shares." I texted Ethan. "It is time to call Catherine." But Graham had one more card to play, and it was the one I had underestimated. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications. My phone was vibrating so hard, it nearly fell off the nightstand. I picked it up. My stomach turned over. The headline on a popular gossip site screamed, "The Billionaire's Broke In-Law. How Nora Bailey is plotting a hostile takeover of her husband's family empire." I clicked the link. The article was a masterpiece of assassination. It painted me as a failed consultant who had married Ethan for his money. It claimed I was estranged from my blue-collar roots and desperate to claw my way into high society. It quoted anonymous sources who said I was abusive to staff, that I had demanded expensive jewelry, and that I was manipulating my emotionally unstable husband to get at his father's fortune. It was lies, all of it. But the comment section was worse. "Gold digger. She looks like trash. Someone should teach her a lesson." My hands shook. I had expected a legal fight. I had not expected this. This was personal. This was designed to humiliate me, to strip me of my credibility so that when I walked into that boardroom, they wouldn't see a competent executive. They would see a greedy wife. Ethan walked into the bedroom. He had seen it. "Don't look at it," he said. Trying to take the phone from me, I pulled away. "I need to see it. Ethan, I need to know what they are saying." "Nora, this is garbage. It is him. We know it is him." I scrolled down. There was a photo of me leaving my office building with my box of things. The caption read, "Fired. Bailey ousted from consulting firm for unethical behavior. They spun my resignation." I whispered. They made it look like I was fired for cause. I threw the phone on the bed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I felt dirty, exposed, violation. But then I remembered the rule, no public smear. Graham had broken the rule. He had gone nuclear. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pulled out my suit. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked. "I am going to the war room." I said, "Nora, you cannot go out there. There are photographers outside." I buttoned my shirt. "Let them take pictures." I said, "I am not hiding. I went to the office. Marla was already there, looking furious. I am going to sue that website into the Stone Age." She growled. "Focus, Marla." I said, "Who planted it?" "It quotes anonymous sources." She said, "It is not anonymous." I said, "It is professional. The narrative is too tight. It hits every insecurity I have. It frames the legal argument before we even make it. This is a PR strategy." I sat down at the computer. I searched for the author of the article, a freelancer. I looked at his other recent pieces, a puff piece on Hale Dominion's Green Energy Initiative. I dug deeper. The freelancer was represented by an agency called Sterling Associates. I pulled up the vendor list for Hale Dominion. Sterling Associates. Monthly retainer. $50,000. There it was. Graham was using shareholder money to pay a PR firm to slander a shareholder. It was another count on the indictment. Capture it. I told Marla. Screenshot everything. The article, the author's history, the payments to Sterling. This is not an embarrassment. Marla. This is evidence. He is using corporate assets to fight a personal battle. That is a breach of fiduciary duty. I looked at the photo of Graham on the whiteboard. You wanted to make me look like a monster. Graham, I thought, but you just handed me the weapon to cut your head off. That night, Ethan did not come to the war room. He went to the estate. He did not tell me he was going. He just went. He found his father in the study, drinking the same scotch, sitting in the same leather chair. Graham looked up when Ethan entered. He smiled, but it was thin. I saw the news. Graham said, "Terrible business. The press can be so cruel." Ethan stood in the center of the room. He did not sit. "You paid for it," Ethan said. Graham waved a hand. "I do not control the internet." "Ethan, you paid Sterling Associates," Ethan said. "We saw the ledger. You paid $50,000 of company money to destroy my wife's reputation." Graham put his glass down. The smile vanished. "She is a liability. Ethan, she is attacking this family. She is plotting with my enemies. I did what I had to do to protect you." "Protect me?" Ethan laughed. It sounded like glass breaking. "You destroyed her because you are afraid of her. You are afraid because she is smarter than you." Graham stood up. He was imposing, a tall man with a lifetime of getting his way. "She is a nobody," he roared. "She is a climber from nowhere. And you? You are a fool for letting her lead you by the nose." "I love her," Ethan said. "Love." Graham spat the word out like it was a piece of gristle. "Love is a liability. Ethan, it is a weakness. Look at you. You are willing to burn down your own legacy for a woman who will leave you the moment the check clears." He walked around the desk. "Marriage is an acquisition. Ethan, you acquire an asset that adds value. She subtracts value. She is a bad investment. Cut your losses." Ethan looked at his father. He looked at the man who had raised him, the man whose approval he had chased for 35 years, and he saw nothing, no love, no warmth, just a calculator in a suit. "You are poor," Ethan said quietly. Graham frowned. "What?" "You have billions of dollars," Ethan said, "but you are the poorest man I've ever met." He turned and walked to the door. "Get out of my house," Graham yelled. "If you walk out that door, you get nothing. I will cut you out of the will. I will leave you with nothing." Ethan stopped. He did not turn around. "You have nothing I want. Dad." He walked out. He got into his car and drove away. He did not look back at the limestone beast. He did not cry. When he got home, I was waiting for him. He walked in and held me. He held me so tight I could hardly breathe. "He is gone." Ethan whispered, "My father is gone." I stroked his hair. "I know." I said, "I know." The next morning, the call came. It was Marla. "We have the count," she said. I put the phone on speaker. Ethan was sitting next to me. "Catherine signed?" I asked. "She signed," Marla said. She was horrified by the risk assessment. She gave us her proxy for the trust's shares. I did the math in my head. The Phoenix Partnership held 10%. The Hale Family Trust held 45%. We have 55% of the voting power. I said, "We have control," Marla said. I looked at Ethan. He nodded. "Draft the letter." I said, "I dictated it then and there. To the Board of Directors of Hale Dominion Group, pursuant to the bylaws of the corporation, the undersigned shareholders, representing a majority of the voting interest, hereby demand a special meeting of the board to be held within 48 hours. Agenda Item 1. The immediate removal of Graham Hale as Chief Executive Officer for cause. Agenda Item 2. The appointment of interim leadership. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window. The city looked different today. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a grid, and I held the master key. Graham Hale had spent his life building walls to keep people like me out. He had forgotten one thing. Walls don't just keep people out. They keep you in. And he was trapped. The war room smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. It was a smell I had grown to associate with survival. We had 48 hours until the special board meeting. In a normal corporate takeover, this period would be spent courting votes and finalizing slide decks. But this was not a normal takeover. It was a siege. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Harper, my lead counsel, and a team of 3 compliance experts we had flown in from Chicago. We were building a fortress of paper. Check the bylaws again. I told Harper, specifically the section on emergency quorum. If Graham tries to claim the meeting is invalid because one director is in the Maldives, I want a precedent that says he is wrong. Harper nodded, her fingers flying across her laptop. We have 3 precedents from Delaware Chancery Court. We are covered. We have also served notice to the corporate secretary via courier, email, and registered mail. He cannot claim he did not know. Good, I said. And the conflict checks? Clean. Harper said. We have disclosed every share owned by the Phoenix Partnership. We have disclosed Marla's prior dealings with the firm. We have disclosed your marriage to Ethan. There is nothing he can use to claim bias. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. Graham was a master of the procedural delay. He would try to adjourn the meeting on a technicality. He would claim the paperwork was filed in the wrong font size if he thought it would buy him a day. I want this airtight. I said, if he sneezes, I want a tissue ready before he can claim we are creating a health hazard. Marla walked in. Her face grim. She was holding a tablet. You need to see this, she said. She turned the volume up. It was a business news channel. The banner at the bottom read, Breaking. Hale Dominion announces strategic restructuring. Graham was not on the screen. Instead, it was a press release being read by a somber anchor. Hale Dominion Group announced today a sweeping restructuring plan aimed at modernizing its operations. The plan, titled Vision 2030, includes the consolidation of manufacturing hubs and a workforce reduction of approximately 15% CEE. Graham Hale cited market uncertainty caused by aggressive external actors as a key driver for these difficult decisions. The room went silent. He is firing people. Sarah Jenkins whispered. She was sitting in the corner, looking horrified. 15%? That is 700 jobs. He is not just firing them, I said, my voice cold. He is blaming us. He is telling the market that the Phoenix Partnership is forcing him to cut costs. He is holding the workers hostage to turn public opinion against us. It was a classic scorched earth tactic. If I proceeded with the takeover, I would be the villain who caused the layoffs. If I backed off, he kept his throne. He is bluffing. David Wu said. He cannot fire 15% of the workforce without crashing production. He does not care about production. I said, he cares about survival. He is willing to burn the village to save the castle. I stood up. We are not letting him do this. What can we do? Harper asked. He is still the CEO. He has the authority to cut staff. We buy the safety net. I said. I turned to the whiteboard. We set up a stabilization fund. We pledged $10 million of our own capital to guarantee severance and retraining for any worker affected by this restructuring, and we announced that if our slate of directors is elected, the first motion will be to freeze all layoffs pending an operational audit. Marla looked at me. Nora, we do not have $10 million in liquidity. We are fully deployed in the bond purchases. Then we raise it, I said, or we cut our own payouts. But I am not letting 700 families starve because my father-in-law is throwing a tantrum. The fracture happened 2 hours later. We were on a conference call with the investors of the Phoenix Partnership. I explained the situation. I explained Graham's move and my counter-move with the stabilization fund. Sarah Jenkins was immediately on board. Do it, she said. My dad would have wanted it. Mr. Henderson, the union rep, was emotional. You save those jobs. Mrs. Bailey, and you will have the union's vote forever. But then David Wu spoke. I do not understand, he said. His voice was tinny over the speakerphone. Graham is doing the dirty work for us. We all know the company is bloated. If he fires 15% of the staff, the overhead drops, and the stock price goes up. Why would we stop him? I stared at the speakerphone. Because it is wrong. David, I said, he is not cutting fat. He is cutting muscle, and he is doing it to hurt people, not to help the business. I did not sign up for a moral crusade. David said, I signed up for a 20% return. If you pledge $10 million to a slush fund for fired workers, you are diluting my equity. I vote no. I cannot move without unanimous consent from the general partners. I said, Then you do not have it. David said, I am blocking the fund. Let Graham fire them. We can rehire the good ones later at a lower wage. The room was deadly quiet. I looked at Marla. She gave me a tiny nod. She knew what I had to do. David, I said, my voice steady, I am triggering the buyout clause in our partnership agreement. Excuse me? Section 4, paragraph 2. I said, the managing partner has the right to buy out any limited partner at fair market value if there is an irreconcilable strategic difference. I am buying your shares. You cannot afford me. David scoffed. My stake is worth $8 million. I will liquidate my personal holdings. I said, and I will take a bridge loan from Marla. You will get your check by morning. You are out. David, Nora, this is financial suicide. He warned, you are draining your war chest right before the final battle. I would rather lose the war than become the enemy. I said, goodbye. David, I disconnected the call. I sat down, my legs shaking. I had just spent every dime I had, plus money I did not have, to get rid of an investor who wanted to make us rich. Marla put a hand on my shoulder. That was expensive. She said, integrity usually is. I said, Ethan was not in the war room. He had been spending his days at the storage unit where his Aunt Catherine had stored 40 years of family records. We needed ammunition for the character clause in the trust, proof that Graham had a history of reckless behavior. He called me at 7 o'clock. Nora, come home, he said. His voice sounded hollow. I found something. When I got to the apartment, the living room was covered in yellowing paper. Old ledgers, diaries, photographs. Ethan was sitting in the middle of it, holding a single sheet of stationery. It was handwritten. The ink was faded to a sepia brown. What is it? I asked, sitting down beside him. It is a letter, Ethan said, from my Uncle Marcus, Graham's older brother. I thought Marcus died in a boating accident in the 80s. I said, he did. Ethan said, this letter was written 3 days before he died. It was addressed to their father, my grandfather. Catherine must have stolen it before Graham could burn it. He handed me the paper. Father, I cannot do it. I cannot sign the papers. I know you say it is just business, but stealing the patent from the Miller family is theft. We are taking their design for the purification system and claiming it as our own. Old man Miller trusts us. If we do this, we destroy them. I know Graham is pushing for it. He says the Millers are too weak to bring it to market. But if we build this fortune on a lie, it will rot from the foundation up. I am going to the patent office on Monday to confess. I looked up at Ethan. The Miller patent. I said, that was the basis for Hale Industrial's first major success. The water filtration systems. They stole it, Ethan whispered. They stole the technology that made us billionaires from a family of inventors in Ohio. And 3 days after Marcus wrote this, he drowned. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. Nora, do you think... I squeezed his hand. We cannot prove that. Ethan, it was 40 years ago, but the theft, he said, the betrayal, it explains everything. It explains why Graham is so paranoid about outsiders. It explains why he hoards power. He knows the whole empire is illegitimate. He has been guarding a crime scene his whole life. He took the letter back and stared at it. He called you trash, Ethan said, his voice trembling with rage. He called you trash because you came from nothing. But we are the trash. Nora, we are thieves in silk suits. He stood up. I am taking this to him. No. Ethan, I said, standing up to stop him. We save this for the lawyers. I am not taking it to the lawyers, he shouted. I am taking it to him. I want to look him in the eye and ask him if he killed his brother for a patent. He grabbed his coat. I am going to the estate. Ethan, wait. I grabbed my bag. I am coming with you. The estate was dark, except for the lights in the library. Graham was waiting. He knew we were coming. He had probably been tracking our phones. Or maybe he just felt the walls closing in. We walked into the library. Graham was standing by the fireplace. He looked older tonight. The stress of the last week had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes were still sharp, still dangerous. He looked at Ethan, then at me. So, he said, the prodigal son and his handler. To what do I owe the pleasure? Ethan threw the letter on the desk. Did you kill him? Ethan asked. Graham looked at the letter. He did not pick it up. He did not need to. He recognized the handwriting. He sighed. Marcus was a drunk, Graham said. He fell off a boat. It was a tragedy. He was going to the patent office. Ethan said. He was going to expose the theft. And then he died. Graham looked up. His expression was bored. Is that what you think? That I'm some kind of movie villain? I was 22 years old. Ethan, I was not a killer. I was just the one who had the stomach to do what was necessary to save the family. He picked up the letter and tossed it into the fire. We watched it burn. It does not matter. Graham said, the statute of limitations on patent fraud ran out before you were born. You have nothing. He turned his gaze to me. And you, he said, you are persistent. I will give you that. You bought the bonds. You bought the coalition. You even bought my sister's proxy. Very clever. It is not clever. Graham, I said, it is math. You are over-leveraged. You are fraudulent. And you are finished. He laughed, a low rumbling sound. You think you can just walk in here and take my company? You think a few pieces of paper make you one of us? He walked closer to me. He smelled of expensive scotch and contempt. You can buy the shares. Nora, you can buy the building. You can even buy the name. But you will never be one of us. You will always be the girl from the Rust Belt who thinks a spreadsheet is a substitute for breeding. You are a tourist in this world, and when the dust settles, you will still be trash. I looked at him. 6 months ago, those words would have made me cry. They would have made me feel small. Now, they just sounded like desperate noise. I took a step forward. Let me tell you something about breeding. Graham, I said, my father was a foreman. He taught me that if you build a foundation on sand, the house falls. You built your house on theft and poison. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was not a letter. It was a balance sheet. I am not here to join your club. Graham, I am here to foreclose on it. I started reciting the numbers. Your debt-to-equity ratio is 4-1. Your current ratio is 0.6. You have $300 million in short-term liabilities maturing in 30 days, and you have $12 million in cash. You are not a billionaire. You are insolvent. I took another step. And as for your board, they are terrified. I spoke to 3 of them this morning. They know about the Redwood Point forgery. They know about the PR payments. They know that if they keep you as CEO for one more day, they are personally liable for gross negligence. Graham's face twitched. They are loyal to me, he snarled. They are loyal to their own net worth. I said, and you are a liability. I dropped the paper on his desk. The meeting is tomorrow at 9. Do not be late. I turned to Ethan. Let's go. Ethan looked at his father one last time. Graham stood by the fire, looking diminished. A king whose castle was crumbling into the sea. Ethan did not say goodbye. He just turned and walked out. We were halfway back to the city when the phone rang. It was Harper. Turn on the news, she said. I pulled up the feed on my phone. Whistleblower reveals toxic cover-up at Hale Dominion. There it was. Jonah Reese had done it. The report led with the forged risk assessment. It showed the 2 documents side by side. It showed the transfers to the Cayman Islands. The SEC had announced a formal investigation. The EPA had announced an emergency inspection of Redwood Point. The stock was plummeting in after-hours trading. It was a free fall. He is dead. Ethan whispered, It is over. I said, The board has no choice now. If they do not fire him tomorrow, the government will seize the company. We drove the rest of the way in silence. It should have felt like a victory lap, but it felt heavy. We had won, but the cost was enormous. The company we were inheriting was on fire. When we got back to the apartment, it was midnight. I poured 2 glasses of wine. My hands were shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion to the end. I said, raising my glass. Ethan did not pick up his glass. He was sitting on the sofa, staring at the floor. He looked pale again, worse than pale. He looked sick. "Ethan?" I asked. "What is wrong?" He looked up at me. His eyes were full of fear. I signed something. He whispered. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Years ago," he said, "when I turned 21. Graham sat me down. He said it was just a formality, a standard family trust document. He said it was to protect the estate in case I ever got divorced." My blood ran cold. "What did you sign?" "Ethan?" "I did not read it," he said, his voice cracking. I trusted him, but I was thinking about it tonight. Something he said in the library. "You have nothing." He stood up and went to the box of papers he had brought from the storage unit. He dug frantically through the bottom layer. He pulled out a blue folder. "I found my copy," he said. "I found it tonight. I was too scared to tell you in the car." He handed it to me. I opened it. It was a dense legal document titled The Hale Family Dynastic Preservation Agreement. I scanned the legalese. My eyes caught a paragraph on page 4. In the event of a hostile change of control attempt initiated by a spouse of any beneficiary, the voting rights of said beneficiary shall automatically revert to the grantor, Graham Hale, for a period of 10 years. I stopped breathing. It was a poison pill, a sleeping agent in the contract. If I was the one leading the takeover, which I was, and if I was Ethan's spouse, which I was, then Ethan's voting rights did not belong to him. They belonged to Graham. We did not have the majority. Without Ethan's shares, the Phoenix Partnership only had 10%. The trust held 45%. And Graham controlled all of it. I looked at Ethan. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew this whole time. That is why he wasn't worried about the shares. That is why he mocked me. He knew that as long as we were married, he controlled your vote." Ethan fell to his knees. He put his head in his hands. "I am so sorry. Nora, I did not know. I swear I did not know." I looked at the document. It was ironclad. If we walked into that meeting tomorrow, Graham would produce this document. He would invalidate Ethan's proxy. He would vote his 45% against the motion to remove him, and with the loyalist board members, he would survive. He would survive the whistleblower. He would survive the debt. He would survive everything, because he still held the keys, unless— I looked at the clause again. Initiated by a spouse. There was only one way to break the clause. I looked at my husband. He was sobbing quietly on the rug. The man I had fought for. The man I had tried to save the company, to save the workers, to stop Graham. I could not be his spouse. "Ethan," I said. He looked up. He saw the look on my face. "No," he whispered. "Nora, no." I sat down on the floor in front of him. I put the document between us. "It is the only way. Ethan, if we are married tomorrow morning, Graham wins. He destroys the company. He buries the truth, and he wins." I reached out and touched his cheek. "But if we are not married, the clause is void." Ethan grabbed my hand. "You cannot ask me to do that." He pleaded. "We can fight it in court. We can argue I was coerced. It will take years." I said, "The company will be dead in a month. The board meeting is in 9 hours. I stood up. I walked to the desk and pulled out a notepad. I wrote a single sentence. "I, Nora Bailey, demand an immediate dissolution of my marriage to Ethan Hale." I tore the page out. "I am calling Harper." I said, "She can draft an emergency filing. We can sign it tonight. We can file it electronically as soon as the court opens at 8 a.m. Nora, please." Ethan stood up. "I love you. Do not do this." I looked at him. My heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. I loved him too. I loved his gentleness. I loved his laugh. But love was not enough to stop a monster. "I am not doing this because I stopped loving you." "Ethan," I said, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, "I am doing this because it is the only way to free you. As long as you are married to me, you are his pawn." I held out the phone. I realized then that the final obstacle wasn't Graham's money. It wasn't the lawyers. It wasn't the press. It was us. We had to break ourselves to fix the world. "Call the lawyer." "Ethan," I said. He looked at me. He looked at the phone. He looked at the window where the city lights burned indifferent and cold. He had to choose, not between his father and me, but between his comfort and his truth. He took the phone. The dawn broke over Manhattan with a gray, steely light that felt less like morning and more like a judgment. I stood by the window of the war room, watching the city wake up. The coffee in my cup was cold, but my hands were steady. Ethan sat at the table behind me. He was wearing a fresh suit, but his face carried the exhaustion of a man who had lived a decade in a single night. We had done it. The emergency filing for dissolution of marriage had been submitted electronically at 8 o'clock sharp. Technically, legally, we were in a gray zone, not fully divorced, but actively contesting the union in a way that froze the spousal control clause of the trust. It was a legal grenade thrown into the machinery of Graham's trap. Ethan looked up as I turned around. "Are you ready?" I asked. He buttoned his jacket. His hands shook slightly, then stilled. "I am ready to tell the truth," he said. I looked at him. This was not the man who had frozen at the dinner table. This was a man who was about to incinerate his own inheritance to do the right thing. "I do not want you to do this for me, Ethan," I said quietly. "I want you to be clear. If we walk into that room and you side with me, Graham will cut you off. You will lose the trust fund. You will lose the estate. You will be, by his definition, destitute." Ethan stood up. He walked over to me. "I have spent my whole life afraid of being poor, Nora, but I realized last night that I have been poor for 35 years. I have been begging for scraps of affection from a man who is incapable of giving it." He adjusted his tie. "I do not want his money. I want his shadow off my life. We did not touch. We did not kiss. We were soldiers going to different fronts of the same war. Let's go," I said. The boardroom of the Hale Dominion Group was located on the 45th floor of the Crestview Tower. It was a room designed to intimidate. The walls were paneled in dark walnut. The view stretched all the way to the Atlantic. The table was a massive slab of black marble that looked like a tombstone. When we arrived, the room was already full. The 12 members of the board sat in stiff silence. They had seen the news. They had read the whistleblower report. They smelled blood, and they were terrified that some of it might be theirs. Graham Hale entered at 9 o'clock exactly. He did not look like a man under investigation. He looked like a king returning to quell a peasant revolt. He wore a navy suit, perfectly tailored. He walked with a bounce in his step. He nodded to the board members, smiling as if this were a routine quarterly review. "Good morning, everyone," he boomed. "Apologies for the circus outside. You know how the press loves a drama. We will have a statement out by noon to clarify these misunderstandings." He took his seat at the head of the table. He looked at me, sitting at the far end with Harper and Marla. He smiled, a cold, pitying expression. "And Nora, I see you brought your legal team. Very aggressive. I suppose we should get this over with so you can get back to whatever it is you do now." I did not smile back. "Mr. Chairman," Harper said, standing up, "we are here pursuant to a demand for a special meeting filed by the majority shareholders." Graham waved a hand. "Majority shareholders?" He chuckled. "I think you need to check your math, Counselor. The Hale Family Trust controls 45% of the voting stock, and as the grantor of that trust, I control the vote." He looked at Ethan, who was sitting 2 seats away from me, and my son, who holds the proxy, knows exactly where his loyalty lies. Isn't that right, Ethan? The room went silent. All eyes turned to Ethan. Graham's gaze was heavy, expectant. He was invoking the clause. He was invoking the lifetime of conditioning. Ethan stood up. He looked at his father, for the first time in his life. He did not look down. "The trust agreement contains a clause regarding spousal influence," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It states that if my spouse initiates a hostile action, my voting rights revert to you." Graham nodded, looking bored. "Exactly. So sit down. Ethan, however," Ethan continued, "that clause only applies if I am married to the hostile party." Graham frowned. "What are you babbling about? Nora and I filed for divorce this morning. Ethan said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of air leaving a room. Graham blinked. He looked at Ethan, then at me. You? What? The marriage is effectively dissolved for the purposes of this conflict, Ethan said. Therefore, the reversion clause is void. I retain my voting rights, and I vote with the Phoenix Partnership. He sat down. Graham's face turned a color I had never seen before, a deep, mottled purple. The vein in his forehead pulsed. You filed for divorce? He whispered. To beat a contract? I stood up. We are not here to discuss my marriage. Graham, we are here to discuss your employment. I signaled to Harper. She tapped a key on her laptop, and the large screen behind Graham flickered to life. A timeline appeared. In 1998, Harper began, her voice crisp and professional. You authorized a payment of $50,000 to a shell company to conceal a structural failure at the Redwood Point containment wall. A document appeared on the screen, the original invoice. In 2004, you moved the liability to an offshore entity called Helix, which you controlled, to keep it off the balance sheet. A bank transfer log appeared, and 3 months ago, Harper continued, you personally altered a risk assessment report from your engineering team, removing the warning about imminent groundwater contamination, and presented that forged document to this board. The two reports appeared side by side. The forgery was obvious. Graham stood up, slamming his hand on the table. This is stolen property, he shouted. This is corporate espionage. It is a whistleblower complaint filed with the SEC. I said calmly, and it is public record as of 6 hours ago. I walked toward the head of the table, but that is not all. Graham. The screen changed. It showed the emails between Graham and Sterling Associates. It showed the draft of the hit piece that had called me a gold digger. It showed the payment of shareholder funds to a gossip site. You used company money to run a smear campaign against a major investor. I said, you breached your fiduciary duty. You exposed this company to liability not to protect the business, but to protect your ego. I looked at the board members, gentlemen and ladies. I said, you have a choice. You can keep him as CEO, in which case the SEC will likely freeze your assets and charge you with complicity and fraud. Or you can do your job. Graham looked around the table. He saw the faces of men and women he had known for decades. He saw fear. He saw calculation. He laughed. It was a jagged, desperate sound. You think you can fire me? He asked. I built this. I am Hail Dominion. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are nothing, he screamed. You are a little girl playing dress-up. You are trash. Do you hear me? You are trash. The word rang out in the quiet room, at the dinner party. He had said it with a smile, a joke between insiders. Here, under the fluorescent lights of the boardroom, stripped of the wine and the crystal. It sounded like what it was, the scream of a bully who had lost his victim. Nobody laughed. George Galloway, the chairman of the audit committee, a man who had golfed with Graham for 20 years, cleared his throat. He did not look at Graham. He looked at the marble table. I moved to suspend Graham Hale as CEO, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation. George said quietly. Graham froze. George? He whispered. I second the motion, said the woman from the logistics subsidiary. Graham looked at them. Betrayal. Absolute betrayal. All in favor? George asked. One by one. The hands went up. It was not a revolution. It was a calculation. They were saving themselves. Graham looked at the forest of hands. He looked at Ethan, whose hand was raised high. The motion carries, George said. Graham stood there for a long moment. He looked at the room he had ruled for 40 years. He looked at the chair he was no longer allowed to sit in. He turned to me. His eyes were dead. You broke it, he said. You broke everything. You broke it 40 years ago. Graham. I said, I just turned on the lights. 2 security guards entered the room. They had been waiting. Mr. Hale, the lead guard said gently, we need to escort you from the building. Graham straightened his jacket. He tried to summon the old dignity, the old power, but it was gone. He looked small. He looked old. He walked to the door. He did not look back at his son. The lobby of the Crestview Tower was a shark tank. The press had smelled blood. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved forward. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Bailey, is it true you are the new CEO? Did you force your husband to vote against his father? Is the company going bankrupt?" Marla tried to steer me toward the waiting car, but I stopped. I stepped up to the podium that had been set up for the press conference. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. I knew what they wanted. They wanted the soap opera. They wanted the story of the daughter-in-law who got revenge. I was not going to give them that story. "My name is Nora Bailey," I said. My voice echoed in the cavernous lobby. "Today, the board of directors of Hale Dominion Group voted to remove Graham Hale from leadership. This was a necessary step to address serious irregularities in the company's environmental and financial reporting." I paused. "But this is not a victory lap. This is a rescue operation." I looked directly into the cameras, to the 5,000 employees of Hale Dominion. "I want to be clear. There will be no mass layoffs. The restructuring plan announced yesterday is canceled." A murmur went through the crowd. "The Phoenix Partnership has established a stabilization fund to ensure that payroll is met and that our vendors, the small businesses that keep us running, are paid immediately. We are appointing an independent compliance officer to audit every division of this company. We are going to clean up Redwood Point, not cover it up." I took a breath. Some people have called this a hostile takeover. It is not. It is a return to integrity. We are going to build a company that creates value, not one that extracts it. Thank you. I stepped back. I did not answer questions about my marriage. I did not answer questions about Graham's personal life. I walked through the crowd, flanked by security. I saw Ethan standing near the exit. He was watching me. He looked proud, and he looked incredibly sad. We sat in the living room of the apartment. It was quiet again. The war was over. The silence was different now. It was not heavy with secrets. It was heavy with the unknown. Ethan held a glass of water. He had not touched alcohol since the night he found the letter. "So," he said, "it is done. It is done." I said. He looked at the divorce papers that were still sitting on the desk. They were legal documents now. They had served their purpose. "Do we have to finish it?" he asked. "The divorce?" I looked at him. I still loved him. I loved the man who had stood up in that boardroom. I loved the man who had chosen truth over money. But love was not a switch. You could not just turn it back on after you had short-circuited the system. "We broke something." "Ethan," I said gently, "we broke the trust. I manipulated the legal system to win a board vote. You hid a document that could have destroyed me. We were at war, and we used our marriage as ammunition." He nodded. Tears welled in his eyes. "I know," he said, "but can we fix it? Can we rebuild?" I looked out the window. "I don't know," I said honestly. I turned back to him. "I cannot go back to how it was. Ethan, I cannot be the wife who shrinks herself to fit into your family, and you cannot be the husband who needs his father's approval to breathe." "I know," he said. "I am done with him. I am going to sell my shares. I am going to walk away." "That is a start," I said, "but it is not enough." I stood up and walked over to him. I sat on the coffee table, facing him. "If we are going to try?" "Ethan, there are conditions." "Name them," he said. "Therapy." I said, "Real therapy. For the trauma. For the conditioning. You need to deprogram yourself from 40 years of Graham Hale." "Done," he said. "And distance." I said, "We need to leave this apartment. We need to leave the Hale orbit. I am going to run the company for 6 months as interim CEO, and then I am going to hire a replacement and step down to the board. I do not want to be the new Graham." "Okay," he said, "and we need to date." I said. He blinked. "Date? We need to start over." I said, "I need to know who you are when you are not Graham's son, and you need to know who I am when I am not fighting a war. We need to see if we actually like each other when the gunfire stops. Ethan managed a small, weak smile. I think I would like to date you. Nora Bailey. I reached out and took his hand. It was warm. Ask me to dinner. I said, tonight? No. I said, tonight? We sleep. Ask me tomorrow. He nodded. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine. We sat there in the quiet of the city. The empire had fallen. The money was safe. The workers were safe. And we were just two people, sitting in the wreckage, wondering if we could build something new out of the pieces. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was messy. It was uncertain, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Thank you for listening to My Billionaire In-Law Called Me Trash at Dinner. So I bought his company and fired him. I hope you enjoyed this journey of retribution and justice. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of dramatic revenge and family secrets, please subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel. Share your thoughts on Nora's decision in the comments. Do you think she should have stayed with Ethan? Or should she have walked away for good? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspective. Until next time.